This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
World leaders continue to address the UN General Assembly amid uncertainty over who will represent Afghanistan. Global attention being put on access to safe and nutritious food in a virtual UN Food Systems meeting. And South Africa prepares to introduce a COVID vaccines passport amid persisting jab hesitancy. Hello and welcome to Africa Live only on CGTN. I'm Mahia Mutua in Nairobi. Ramanyang joins me now with the business headlines.
That's right, Mahia. Here's what's coming up in the next 30 minutes. South Africa's central bank has kept its main policy rate unchanged at 3.5%, but it's raised the growth forecast for 2021. And Nigeria's in talks with OPEC Plus to raise its oil production quota to some 2.2 million barrels of crude per day. But other details on those stories and lots more coming your way in the course of the hour. For now, let's start with the latest in current affairs with Mahia.
Rama, thank you. We begin at the top of the hour in New York, where leaders from across the world continue to address the 76th session of the United Nations General Assembly. Among those scheduled to give their speeches this Thursday are leaders from South Africa, Iraq and Libya's National Unity Government. For the very latest, let's now go to John Terrett, who is standing by for us in New York. John, what can you tell us about what's been happening at the UN complex this Thursday and what's still to come?
Hi there, Mahia. Well, I hope you can devote the rest of the program to me because I've got an awful lot to say. So here we go. First of all, the UN Security Council met in early session this morning under the banner topic of conflict and climate change. And the Secretary General, who, as you know, has delivered some very, very powerful speeches this week, rather somber speeches, rather scary speeches in my view, actually, particularly regarding climate change. He's called for bold action on climate change or risk security all over the world. And the Secretary General here is, I have to say, talking directly about and to Africa, because the Secretary General believes that there is a definite straight line link between climate change and conflict, fighting all over the world, but particularly in Africa, where there have been droughts followed by extreme flooding. That leads to arguments over crops which have been damaged and food distribution and all that sort of thing. And I think Africa is the target when he speaks about that. And I would say even more than that, probably a good example would be Sudan and the issues going on in that particular country. Now, China and Russia were not present in this meeting. They think the two issues are very important, but not lumped together. But Antony Blinken, who's the US Secretary of State, he was present along with prime ministers and members of various NGOs and other ambassadors and various leaders. And he said it's time to stop asking whether the UN Security Council is the proper forum to discuss things like food security and, in this case, climate security. He says it is, and that the Council has a unique power and it should use that power to help solve these kinds of issues. Now, over and above that, within the last, well, getting on for probably getting on for 20 hours or so now, the permanent members of the Security Council met late last night to discuss the issue of Afghanistan and the Taliban, the new government there. So too, in the last 24 hours, have members of the G20 who are meeting in Rome in a couple of weeks' time. And the point of those two meetings was to discuss the issue of Afghanistan, the new Afghanistan, and the new leadership in Kabul, namely the Taliban. And finally, another thing which is very pertinent to Africa as well, very pertinent indeed. We are now just getting underway, the UN Food Systems Summit, and it has some pretty lofty goals. School meals for all, zero food waste, and an agricultural innovation mission designed to deal with climate and how you grow crops in this changing climate with drought and with flooding and also food distribution as well. It's designed to trigger a transformation of food systems globally. And for our Chinese viewers, of great interest, Chu Dongye, who is the head, he's the Director General of the UN Food and Agricultural Organization. He's the first Chinese person to hold that position. He will be in attendance this afternoon. He's been in that top job since August of 2019. Mahia?
And John, you mentioned Afghanistan there. It is, looking ahead to Monday, it is a major talking point already. What are you hearing about who's likely to give an address on behalf of Afghanistan?
Well, Well, I know it's a very key issue indeed. As I say, the P5 met late last night to discuss this, to get a positioning statement on it. So too the G20 ahead of their summit coming up. The Taliban have written to the UN and said, look, we would like to address the UN General Assembly, and we wish to do that as the newly installed, legitimate, as they would see it, government in Kabul and for the whole of Afghanistan. Now, the problem with this is that there is a mechanism within the UN system which adjudicates whether countries are able to address something like the UN General Assembly, and then whether or not they're allowed to be members of the UN, whether they infringe any of its rules. Now, an example that is outside Afghanistan would be the current issue in Myanmar, for example, which is now being run by a military junta. And I think China and the US have deferred the positioning of that country so that they might be able to speak at an event like this. That's been put off, so I think they missed this time around. And the problem with the Taliban's request is that there's so much animosity towards them here at the United Nations because of their positions on all sorts of issues, but primarily their positions on women and children and minorities and that sort of thing. And I think the other feeling here is it's just a bit too early to deal with this interim administration in Kabul, because it's difficult to know who is really representing them, who should we really be hearing from, all that kind of thing. In other words, the administration is described as an interim administration and it's in its very, very early stages. So the Afghan ambassador appointed by Ashraf Ghani is in a very tough position because he was appointed by the old regime. He now officially represents the new one, and we're going to have to wait and see whether he speaks or whether the Taliban do come up on video link from Kabul. No decision as yet has been taken. We'll have to watch what happens over the weekend. In the meantime, Mahia, the general debate continues today, Friday, Saturday. They take Sunday off, and it will all wrap up on Monday. So we're just going to have to wait and see on the issue of the Taliban. Mahia?
All right, John, thank you very much for speaking to us here on Africa Live. John Terrett joining us live from the sidelines of the UN General Assembly in New York. Moving on, the 5 permanent members of the UN Security Council say they will press the Taliban to be more inclusive. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres said the 5 countries, China, Russia, France, the US and the UK, would like to see an Afghanistan where the rights of women and girls are respected. This year's UN General Assembly is ongoing in New York. Organizers say the Taliban has requested an opportunity to make an address to world leaders. Afghanistan is due to speak on Monday. Our correspondent Zmarialai Abbasin reports from Kabul.
Well, the Taliban are reacting to this and acting Foreign Minister Amir Khan Muttaqi today in a ceremony for the introduction of the acting Minister of the Commerce of the country appointed to these issues, saying that Afghanistan is not alone now, and it has a very deep relationship with the regional countries and also with some international countries. According to Amir Khan Muttaqi, the world should not pressurize the Taliban because this is not an Afghanistan of 20 years ago, and it's a different country, and the Taliban want better relationship with the world, with the region. That's why the world should also recognize them as a state of Afghanistan and finally come with a positive aspect and impact over the government and the country. And the Taliban seems to be very much serious about becoming a normal state of the international community and a normal member of the world. That's why many experts in the country believes that the world should not politicize many issues like freezing the more than $9 billion of Afghanistan, and that's now it's time for the international community to overthink about Afghanistan stability.
World Health Organization Director General Tedros Ghebreyesus has called on UN member states to fully support its COVID-19 vaccination plan, noting that lower-income countries are far behind target. Ghebreyesus says the WHO has set a goal to vaccinate 10% of the population of every country by the end of September, 40% by the end of this year, and 70% by mid-next year. Almost 90% of wealthier countries have now reached the 10% September vaccination target, but 50 countries, most of them from Africa, won't achieve this month's goal. Ghebreyesus also called on high-income countries to step up their pledges of more than 1 billion doses to the global vaccine distribution facility, COVAX. He says less than 15% of those doses have materialized.
As it stands, 1 in 3 people globally are fully vaccinated against COVID-19. But in Africa, this drops to 1 in 25. COVAX deliveries are still coming into African countries, with 4 million doses arriving in the past week. These shipments are greatly appreciated, but it's concerning that only a third of the doses pledged by the end of 2021 have been received. The pace of vaccination in Africa must rise by over 7 times to around 150 million per month on average to meet the global goal of vaccinating 70% of every country's population.
Well, to get more insights on how distribution of COVID-19 vaccines has been heavily skewed against poorer nations, we earlier spoke to Dr. Aslam Dasu, a co-convener of the Progressive Health Forum from Johannesburg, South Africa.
This is a fraught question. And listening to the US administration, President Biden has said that, yes, it's both feasible to do that for their own population, as well as supply vaccines to the rest of the world, and it's not an either or. Well, I think that too is a little, questionable. I think it is a bit of an either or, and the signs on the third dose boost of certainly the 2-shot vaccines like Pfizer, only really justifies vaccinating people with a third boost who have, underlying immune compromised positions. Well, we can certainly say in South Africa and many countries in Africa that we have high numbers of immune compromised people who would naturally fall into that category, but we haven't even given them a first shot. So the issue about a third dose, while I can understand a country wanting to protect its more vulnerable citizens, cannot be a mass rollout. The first most important thing, the WHO is correct here, is that we need to get the first jab into the arms of most people that we can in the shortest possible time. And that must be the overriding strategy. I think the fact that there's some movement now among the richer countries to donate vaccine and to open up supply is very encouraging, and that must be pushed hard. But these ideas that you need to give third, and some countries are even doing fourth booster shots, are not really fully supported yet by the science, even though they do show some increase in immune response. But at a mass scale and in terms of managing the pandemic, it's not really viable. And at this point, we need the vaccines to go to those regions of the world where there has been a shortage of supply and a very low rate of vaccination.
Now, South Africa is planning to introduce a vaccine passport amid widespread mistrust of the COVID-19 vaccine in the continent's most affected country. President Cyril Ramaphosa says having an immunized adult population is key to fully reopening the economy and avoiding a fourth wave of infections. CGTN's Yolisa Njamela has more.
The issue of the vaccine passport has sparked quite a debate here in South Africa. While vaccinating against COVID-19 remains a personal choice, the passport could limit a person's ability to move freely. And that is because once the vaccine passports have been effected, those who have not been inoculated will likely be denied access to some places.
On an approach for vaccine passports, which can be used as evidence of vaccination for various purposes and events, so that as people go around, they're able to demonstrate that yes, they've been vaccinated, and the Department of Health is looking at a variety of mechanisms like they have in other countries to either do it electronically through cell phone or other form of demonstration.
The president says immunization of the adult population is necessary if the economy is to be fully reopened and to also avoid a fourth wave of infections. The number of COVID-19 cases has dropped sharply in the country. Meanwhile, the tourism industry has welcomed the announcement of a possible vaccine passport. Some believe that the passport will help facilitate travel for all vaccinated South Africans. But there are still a few hurdles to deal with.
I think there's a few things with regards to the vaccine passports and the digital passports. One is standardization. So we know we've got the capabilities to get it in. Creating a QR code is the next one, but also global standardization and acceptance. The EU have probably been the most successful with this. They've done about 26 to 28 countries that have got this, and it's probably seen as the standard now. So as much as we have the capability to roll it out, we've also got to meet those criteria.
Desai says once those have been dealt with, the vaccine passport will ensure easy passage for travelers.
It gives confidence to the countries that haven't opened up to South Africa to go, we've got a QR code, we've got vaccine passports, and we open for business, and the vaccine program going up. And hopefully we can get some borders open that haven't been opened just yet.
President Cyril Ramaphosa is expected to brief the country about the issue within a week. Yudisa Njamela for CGTN in Johannesburg, South Africa.
Well, it's time for us to take a quick break. Here's what's still ahead on the program. Global attention being put on access to safe and nutritious food in a virtual UN Food Systems meeting. And we shine the spotlight on another remarkable African woman making a positive contribution in Ghana.
You don't find the stories of North Africa by sitting on the sidelines. You've got to get out, go there, and you'll find them. In the bazaars of Casablanca, among the crowds in Cairo,
who come to visit Cairo, the ancient capital of Egypt.
Along the waters of the Nile, along the sands of the Sahara. No one else will take you where we can in North Africa. No one else will show you what it's all about. CGTN, see the difference.
Welcome back. Thank you for staying with us on Africa Live. Now, farmers in the northern Nigerian city of Jos are turning to greenhouse farming as an escape route from unsustainable traditional farming, which has been badly hit by persistent conflict and insecurity. Tesem Akende has more details.
Agom Ajiji is a tomato farmer on the outskirts of Jos in north-central Nigeria. He farms the traditional way, with hoes and other handheld tools to cultivate his crops. But he says the threat of constant violence has impacted his output and income.
We've been dispossessed of several farmlands due to disputes with herders. As a family, we used to have several hectares on which we farmed, but all of that is now history. My tomato harvest used to be in hundreds of baskets, but now the land to farm on is really small.
The United Nations World Food Programme says escalating violence in northern Nigeria is forcing farmers to flee their homes, abandon their fields and sources of income. Some 8.6 million people are now food insecure in the country's northeast alone. Some farmers have managed to find new ways to protect their livelihoods. Ayuba Pyokdom is a farmer who grows vegetables in greenhouses in Jos, which means his produce is more protected.
Yes, it's expensive at the beginning, but as soon as you start, there is a lot you can gain from this. And you know that whatever you sell here, you don't find it commonly around here. I can tell you, like I said earlier, the tomatoes, the cucumber, the pepper, I don't sell them around us. I have an off-taker who goes straight to Abuja. Very big shopping mall, very big. And then for security, of course, here it's secured because it's within the house.
Farmers are stepping up pressure on the government to do more to improve security across the country so that they can farm in peace. The government says it has deployed more security personnel to troubled areas in the country. President Muhammadu Buhari in June this year visited troops in Borno State in the country's northern region and directed them to win the war against enemies of the Nigerian state. He has vowed the government will not give in until insecurity is defeated and peace restored in the entire nation. The expectation is that these efforts will be enough to provide a safer environment for farmers like Agom Ojiji, who can't afford sophisticated farming to contribute to the nation's food security. Tassem Akende, CGTN Jos, Nigeria.
Well, the issue of improving agricultural output is expected to feature prominently during the UN Food Systems Summit, which will take place virtually during the ongoing UN General Assembly. The summit will focus on ensuring access to safe and nutritious food for all and a shift to sustainable consumption patterns, among other topics. Well, let's discuss this further with Abebe Haile Gabriel, the Assistant Director General and Regional Representative for Africa at the Food and Agriculture Organization. Abebe, why is it important for global leaders to pay special attention to food systems?
Thank you for having me. First, this is because ending hunger and malnutrition in all forms is a shared agenda for all. It is a unifying agenda, the success of which will have positive effect on all other sustainable development goals. On the other hand, a failure in achieving the goal on ending hunger and malnutrition will negatively impact progress on other sustainable development goals. But secondly, the evidences are compelling for taking bold actions. The world is not on track to ending hunger and malnutrition by 2030. Between 720 and 811 million people are faced with hunger in 2020. And this is an increase by about 161 million people from 2019. About 282 million of these are in Africa, and this would constitute more than a quarter of Africa's population. Healthy diets are not affordable to the majority of the people, and the drivers are many and overlapping. As you know, conflicts, climate variability and extremes, economic slowdowns and downturns, the transboundary pests and diseases. We have already known enough about COVID-19, the desert locusts in Eastern Africa, among others. And the projections confirm, without bold actions to accelerate progress, hunger will not be eradicated by 2030. These are interrelated and require collaborative actions by all, most importantly by leaders. That is why we have global leaders who have gathered in New York at this special summit to make their bold commitments, hence the special attention to food systems.
Right, and I suppose as a result of that, the question is, how can food systems then be scaled up sustainably to ensure that everyone has access to enough nutrition?
The answer lies in transforming agri-food systems for it to be more efficient, more inclusive, more resilient, and more sustainable. Efficient systems raise food productivity along the whole food supply chains, not just at production, and makes food more available and more affordable through reduction in unit costs of production, for example. Inclusive systems integrate job opportunities and improve incomes for a lot of people, hence improved access to food. Resilient systems address the challenges of vulnerability of livelihoods and production systems, which is a structural bottleneck in regions such as in Africa. Sustainable systems lead to reduction of waste and lead to judicious management and utilization of natural resources. So this will collectively contribute to better production, to better nutrition, a better environment, and better life for all, without leaving no one behind.
Indeed, and all eyes will be on the UN Food Systems Summit. I guess the next question would be, what kind of action plans should those attending the UN Summit come up with?
The aspiration is for countries and partners to build food systems that can deliver food security and nutrition for all. that can also sustain the livelihoods of the diverse agri-food system actors, because there are so many actors along the supply chain, along the agri-food value chains, from production, processing, distribution, consumption, but also a food system that should not compromise the economic, social, and environmental base needed to ensure the food security and nutrition of the future generations. And ambitious commitments from a broad range of leaders and partners are expected for concerted actions on what the Secretary General would call Feed Hope for a better future along 5 action tracks. And these are: ensure access to safe and nutritious food for all, shift to sustainable consumption patterns, boost nature-positive solutions, production, advance equitable livelihoods, and build resilience to vulnerabilities, shocks, and stress.
And finally, Abebe, looking specifically at the African continent, how can innovation and technology then be applied, especially to the continent, to mitigate against food scarcity?
Innovation is key, but it's not just in science and in technology, but also in policy, in systems, in institutions, including in finance. These are key for success, and innovation covers all this. And there are innovative solutions that Africa can tap into and develop to transform the agri-food systems, to achieve, as I said earlier, better production, better nutrition, better environment, a better life for all. Africa can uptake and adapt existing technologies and innovations and harness them for accelerating this food systems transformation. For example, digital agriculture is driving change and transformation in rural Africa. We know this, in which young people are the major drivers. We need to take advantage of this. However, we have to also recognize the fact that there are significant gaps between the global scale available options that are available and the local and national level capacities, which are weak. This can be bridged through institutional innovations and policy innovations and capacity strengthening to promote science, innovation, technology, and knowledge sharing and application.
Right.
Institutions such as FAO, these are the things which we support countries to do.
Right. Okay, thank you very much, Abebe Haile Gabriel, the Assistant Director General and Regional Representative at the Food and Agriculture Organization, speaking to us live there. Staying with that story, rural small-scale farmers produce about a third of global food and supply up to 80% of food in parts of Africa and Asia. That's according to the International Fund for Agricultural Development. However, food waste is common due to transport challenges caused by poor infrastructure. In Kenya, for example, farmers lose produce due to production gluts and policies that fail to promote local agro-processing. CGTN's Wilkista Nyabwa toured Nyandarua County in central Kenya, where food is rotting in the farms as people starve in other parts of the country.
The persistent drizzle can't stop the women working on the farm. In fact, it makes their hands fly even faster. This is Nyandarua, an area about 2 hours' drive away from Kenya's capital, Nairobi. Smallholder farmers here grew leafy vegetables, peas, carrots and potatoes, staples on local tables. But this has not been a good season for the farmers.
These potatoes have already matured. We should have harvested and sold them already, but we can't find a market for them.
The brokers who used to buy food from James to transport for sale in bigger markets have stopped coming. Next door, Joseph's neighbor, Njeri, has decided to feed her cows with the smaller potatoes before they rot in the fields.
We used to sell to brokers, but they aren't coming to the farm anymore. There are no buyers.
The farmers say their problems began when the government started to implement the Irish potatoes regulations. The law demands that potatoes be packaged in bags not exceeding 50 kilograms. One such bag sells at just about $5, hardly enough to make a profit. But other regions around the country have continued to pack their potatoes in bigger bags.
When the buyers go to the marketplaces, They find bigger bags and they like those ones. So they saw that we couldn't compete and stopped buying ours.
With the rains coming, it is imperative that farmers in this region start harvesting the food on their farms. And yet, while parts of the country continue to face hunger, in this region there's plenty of food but no market and nowhere to take it. This comes as Kenya's National Disaster Management Authority has announced that over 2 million people are facing starvation because of droughts in parts of the country. And the question of how to safeguard smallholder farmers' contribution to food security across the continent rears its head.
Small-scale farmers in the context of Africa are very key. They produce 70% of what we are consuming. And unfortunately, half of that goes to waste on the continent because it simply does not get to market. If we crowd in infrastructure that they need, the roads, the energy, the refrigeration, we could actually recuperate quite a lot of that loss.
These are some of the issues expected to come to the fore as the United Nations Food Summit debates how to mobilize resources to ensure access to safe and nutritious food for all.
That will be a space to also call in for more resources, actually a call for action for the transformation that needs to take place. Governments can use tariffs, taxes, subsidies, income support, to focus and promote nutrition-rich foods.
Across the region, smallholder farmers are also exploring agro-processing options while seeking government support. Through their resilience, they continue to work to stay afloat as they keep populations across the region fed. Wilkes Anyabwa, CGTN.
Further afield, America's special envoy for Haiti has resigned amid a deportation scandal. The U.S. has been flying hundreds of people back to Haiti since Sunday. Living conditions are reported to be worsening in migrant camps on both sides of the U.S.-Mexico border. Haitians are fleeing grinding poverty and a country devastated by mismanagement and corruption. Ambassador Daniel Foote says Washington's decision to deport migrants is, quote, inhumane. He also says U.S. policy on Haiti is deeply flawed and his recommendations have been ignored and dismissed. The UN has warned Washington that its actions could violate international law. Now, an Egyptian artist has held a one-day exhibition to highlight the plight of Palestinian children who lost their lives in a recent conflict. Artist Shosha Kamal displayed toys that belonged to 66 Palestinian miners who were killed in the 11-day war between Israel and Hamas in the Gaza Strip last May. Dubbed 66 Toy Stories, the project aims to emphasize the dire humanitarian conditions that children in Gaza live in. CGTN's Adel Makhroui was at the exhibition and now reports.
Sounds of children giggling and laughing fill the exhibition hall. Lullabies in the background highlight the beauty and joy that childhood should be. Yet this artwork is about misery, about the 66 young Palestinians who were killed during the last war between Israel and Hamas in May.
Their only fault that they lived in an area of conflict. That was the main inspiration, and that was the piece of information that triggered the entire thing. In such a short time, you could destroy 66 families and shatter them.
Shosha and her team reached out to all Palestinian families who had lost their children in the war, asking them to share one of their remaining belongings. Some of these items were the last surviving memory of their most beloved, yet they didn't hesitate to share them with the exhibition to show the world how much they are suffering.
At first we tried to going into the formal institutions road, but they were so burdened with much more than an art exhibition. They were burdened with getting them homes and food and medicine. It was such a catastrophe on all levels. So we said, okay, that's the reality. Let's not lose hope and try to reach the families in a very informal way. If you check the title, most of the scenes we could identify the child and say that this toy belonged to him. But unlike this scene, the 3 dolls were not, we did not take them from the families. The families had nothing to give them. And they gave us the permission to dig in the ashes, to dig in the remains of the building.
Among the echoes of children screaming and the shocking sounds of bombings, the walls of the exhibition quote what a toy would say about its deceased owner. A toy with no name, for example, means that either this child's entire family was killed or that the family didn't get the remains of their bodies.
We as human beings avoid pain. So when I first decided to do this, I was confident no one would be interested to come because it is a painful cause. Already we face pain on daily basis, so we'd like to avoid that as much as we can. I didn't expect people would come. I didn't expect they would be interested to know their stories. When they know their stories, they would feel them that much.
The May war in Gaza saw widespread destruction in the Palestinian Strip. A record number of rockets were fired from the Strip, and at least 243 Palestinians were killed.
11 days of war on Gaza have left 66 Palestinian children dead. 66 lives have been cut short because of war. And through their belongings and toys, residents of the Egyptian capital can experience audio and visually the suffering that these kids and their families feel. Adel Mahroui, CGTN, Cairo.
Well, it's just about time for us to check in on all the latest from the world of business. Ramanyang is back with that.
Thank you very much, Mahia. Here's what's coming up in business. South Africa's central bank keeps its main policy rate unchanged at 3.5%, but it raises its growth forecast for 2021. And we'll explore why Nigeria is asking the oil production cartel OPEC to allow it to raise its production quota to over 2 million barrels a day.
How will your world change today? What happens here? What happens there? Or what you make happen for yourself? If it matters to you, it matters to us too. Your stories are the stories that need to be told. Africa Live. Find your voice. Africa Live. Find your voice.
Welcome back to the program. Let's start with monetary policy. South Africa's central bank has decided to keep the main policy rate unchanged at 3.5%. That was a unanimous decision. That decision does come as high commodity prices are helping Africa's most developed economy to bounce back, if you will, from the pandemic-induced recession a lot faster than expected. The bank's Monetary Policy Committee now expects GDP growth of up to 5.3% this year, much higher than the 4.2% that was initially forecast at the last meeting in July. That said, the committee is warning that much of the economic recovery has already taken place. The South African Reserve Bank has also lowered its GDP forecast for 2022 to 1.7% from 2.3% previously. South Africa isn't just the continent's most industrialized economy, it's also the world's 12th biggest emitter of greenhouse gas emissions. And it says the total emissions will start to decline in 2025. It also disclosed that it's in talks to secure financing to transition to the use of a lot more clean energy. Now, that decline in emissions of climate warming gases is a decade earlier than planned in the previous target, and it will result from the adoption of a much tougher goal or nationally determined contribution ahead of the COP26
international climate talks. South Africa depends on coal for over 90% of the electricity that is generated in the country, and about a third of its motor fuel is actually made synthetically from coal. Government officials are due to meet with a delegation from the United States, the UK, France and Germany in the days to come to discuss support for a program of shutting down coal-fired power plants and building a lot more renewable energy facilities. Back into public finance, Ethiopia is asking the International Monetary Fund for a new deal, days after the first meeting of the nation's major creditors panel to rework its existing debt load. Now, setting up a creditors panel and an agreement on how to deal with Ethiopia's nearly $30 billion worth of external debt will pave the way for the IMF to then determine how to engage with the country on its economic recovery. The lender's executive board is yet to approve disbursements from the extended credit facility and the extended fund facility, the ECF and the EFF respectively, the form of which has actually expired. Now, that's despite reaching staff-level agreements. Ethiopia has requested a new IMF credit arrangement, potentially with a similar amount, to replace the one that has just lapsed. In commodities, Nigeria is in talks with OPEC Plus to raise its oil production quota to about 2.2 million barrels a day. Now, the country says it can achieve that level of production within 6 months if given the green light. At the moment, Nigeria is producing well below its potential 1.74 million barrels a day quota. Output is around 1.4 million barrels a day, due in part to technical challenges, but it expects to hit that output target at least within the next month or two. Africa's topmost oil producers not expecting OPEC Plus to take any extraordinary measures when they do eventually meet next month. Current oil prices are approaching $78 a barrel. It's $70 a barrel. That's an optimal figure, and it's expected that peak oil demand might come in 2030. In East Africa, Tanzania has reduced its growth forecast for 2021 and it's raised its projected budget deficit. The government over there says that the changes are due to the COVID-19-induced economic slowdown. Tanzania's economy is now expected to expand by 4% this year, down from a forecast of 5.6% back in June. Here's Daniel Kijo with the latest data.
The change has partly been attributed to lockdowns and the closure of industries across the world, which severely impacted the movement of people and goods, therefore bringing implications in revenue collections. The Finance and Planning Ministry's permanent secretary says key sectors have been seriously impacted by the third wave of COVID-19 in the first 6 months of 2021 that have forced the government to review its projections from between 4 to 5% instead of the previous 5.6% by the end of the year. Sectors like tourism performed poorly in the first quarter, and COVID-19 further slowed down its recovery in the second quarter. There have been signs of recovery after vaccine jab campaigns gathered pace. The government says travel restrictions limited the transportation of people and cargo, therefore reducing the sector's contribution to the country's economic growth. The government plans to present to the parliament a supplementary budget in February of 2022 after the media review to properly account for all the necessary pandemic spending. Regarding the supplementary budget, he said that was a move aimed at seeking parliamentary approval of the funds recently secured from the IMF in order for the money to be legally utilized. The IMF funds have already arrived, with procedures underway to sign agreements with the government of Zanzibar and different ministries on how the money will be spent. Part of the commitment with the IMF involved the Tanzanian government resuming the publication of COVID-19 data regularly by the end of this month. CGTN's Daniel Kijo, Dar es Salaam.
All right, then I'll leave it there for the time being, but I'll be back at the top of the hour. In global business, we'll be looking at Zambia, Africa's second largest copper producer, but also the continent's first pandemic-era debt defaulter. It's the latest attempt that the African country is going to be taking to secure a lending package from the IMF to help it emerge from a pretty nasty debt crisis. But what are the prospects of Zambia getting a deal with the IMF and the World Bank and eventually solving this $13 billion puzzle? We'll have some details on that and plenty more at the top of the hour. See you then. For now, back to Mahia.
Rama, thank you. Well, still to come here on Africa Live. We'll be shining the spotlight on another remarkable African woman making a positive contribution in Ghana.
And a mile away from my house, they stopped me, handed me over a gun and asked me to kill my whole family and all those people.
We were always waiting for being killed every day.
I realized personally that the international community was not going to intervene.
La vie était très dure, c'est vrai, parce que, bon, pour nous, on s'était séparés de nos familles.
You're watching breaking news on CGTN.
Welcome to the world today on CGTN.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Welcome back. Well, let's take you to the UN General Assembly in New York, where Tanzanian President Samia Suluhu Hassan is making her inaugural address to the Congress. Let's listen in now.
Deep sense of conviction and faith in multilateralism in solving multitude of challenges that our world faces today. I'm here to assure you that under my stewardship, Tanzania will remain a formidable member of the United Nations and a dependable supporter of multilateralism. We'll keep our arms open to those who embrace us and engage with us. We'll continue to be Tanzania that you have known and relied on, a Tanzania that peacefully and respectfully coexisted and cooperated with all countries, big or small, mighty or weak, rich or poor, to make this world, our world, a better place for all of us. Mr. President, COVID-19 pandemic has reminded us how vulnerable we are as individual countries, regardless of our size, wealth, or geography. As we meet here today, we have less than a decade ahead to meet our collective commitment to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. I note with great regret that according to the Sustainable Development Goals report of 2020, right now, the world is not on track to achieve the 2030 agenda, mainly due to adverse impact of COVID-19. The report further shows that in some areas, this pandemic has even reversed the progress that was already achieved years back. For instance, it is expected that around 71 million people who got out of extreme poverty will be pushed back into that situation because of this pandemic. What is depressing is the fact that these impacts are not felt evenly. We in the developing world are the most affected. It is therefore imperative that concerted efforts are undertaken to address this devastating situation. Mr. President, developing nations must be assisted in addressing socioeconomic impact of out of COVID-19. On this note, we are thankful to multilateral financial institutions for their efforts in saving many economies from collapsing. These kinds of interventions are important. We cannot afford to take refuge on the onset of COVID-19 as an excuse for not making sufficient progress on achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. Mr. President, Tanzania has not been spared by COVID-19. After the onset of the pandemic, we in Tanzania, and I believe in many other developing countries, were stuck in the twilight of protecting lives and protecting livelihoods. Measures advocated by the World Health Organization were geared towards protecting lives. However, in an economy like Tanzania, consisting of a bigger proportion of people living on subsistence economy, whom we need to keep them afloat, my country therefore adopted all necessary measures to curb the spread of COVID-19, including joining the COVAX facility to ensure that Tanzania gain access to the COVID-19 vaccine. The vaccination campaign has started in July this year with the most vulnerable communities and later on other age groupings. Mr. President, globally, when COVID-19 vaccines were being developed, some of us were hopeful that this would mean something good to all of humanity. Nevertheless, we have come to learn that the virus is moving faster than the global production of and distribution of vaccines. And the vast majority of vaccines have been administered in high and upper middle income countries. With the current pace, it is less likely that we'll meet the WHO threshold of vaccinating at least 40% of people in every country by end of 2021, and at least 70% by the first half of 2022. The level of vaccine inequity that we see is appalling. It is truly disheartening to see that whilst most of our countries have inoculated less than 2% of our populace and thus seek more vaccines for our people, other countries are about to roll out the third dose, calling it booster vaccine. We tend to forget that nobody safe.
Tanzanian President Samia Suluhu Hassan making her inaugural address at the UN General Assembly in New York at the moment. She touched on sustainable development goals as well as COVID-19 and vaccination inequality, as well as the fight against corruption in her and other African nations. We will, of course, have more on her speech as well as those of other African presidents in our subsequent bulletins. Well, it's time to move to the sports now. Rwanda has been confirmed as the host nation of the 2025 UCI Road World Cycling Championships, becoming the first African country to organize the world's biggest cycling event. The Rwanda cycling governing body, Ferwasi, confirmed the news through their official online platforms ahead of Friday's official announcement by the International Cycling Union in Louvain, Belgium. Speaking to CGTN, Ferwasi President Abdallah Murezi said the nod from UCI has meant a lot to a country that has for years demonstrated great passion for the sport.
I can say one of the biggest event in the world. It's a world-class event. For Rwandans, I think it's an honor to organize such events. As you know, we have been struggling to bring or to raise the level of Tour de Rwanda. So once we get the chance, will be not only in terms of competition, but also in terms of tourism. People across the world will come, will know what is happening in Rwanda. We'll get many guests from different countries. For us, it's an honor, and our Rwandan bike lovers, cycling lovers are very excited to receive such event, and they are very ready to make the event a success and a shining event.
Elsewhere, South Africa's Banyana defeated Nigeria's Super Falcons 4-2 to win the Aisha Buhari Cup that concluded earlier this week. The week-long Six-Nation tournament was organized by the Nigeria Football Federation in honor of the country's First Lady. Here is CGTN's Deji Bademosi with more.
With both the Nigerian Super Falcons and South Africa's Banyana winning their opening games in the tournament, everyone was looking forward to an interesting clash between these two long rivals. While the Super Falcons was hoping to use the match and the tournament to cement their place as the dominant force in women's football on the continent, the Banyana wanted to prove that they are equally a force that can beat any team. And and they did beat the Super Falcons with some class. They took the game to the Falcons right from the blast of the whistle, pressuring Nigerian defender Alozie Chidi to score an own goal in the 7th minute. By the 19th minute, it was 2-0, courtesy a penalty conceded by Falcons' longtime defender Onome Ebi. And with just a minute left to the end of the first half, Banyana scored the 3rd goal off a header from Gabriela Salgado to silence the vociferous Nigerian supporters. The Super Falcons fought back in the second half. Substitute Vivian Ikechukwu reduced the deficit by 1 goal to bring the score to 3-1. She scored again in the 53rd minute to make it 3-2. But any hope of a turnaround for the Super Falcons would be completely extinguished when they were caught on the counter by the South Africans, who committed the Nigerians to give away a penalty converted by Mamelo Makabane in the 87th minute.
We managed the game really well.
We managed the game really well. And when we were under pressure, we always knew we'd get another chance. Nigeria is a fantastic team. So we had to stay on top of our game for the full 90 minutes because we almost gave it away in the last 10 minutes.
We have seen the loopholes. We have seen where we are going to work on. So I think generally they gave us a good fight. They gave us a good fight, and I'm so proud of the girls coming back from the second half to score the 2 goals. But nevertheless, it was a good game.
The win is a huge boost for the South African side and somewhat compensates for their penalty loss to the Super Falcons in the last Africa Women's Cup of Nations in Ghana in 2018. They will be hoping this victory would propel them to qualify for the next AFCON and possibly win the trophy when it takes place in Morocco next July. Deji Bademasi, CGTN, Lagos, Nigeria.
And that's it for this edition of Africa Live. Do remember, you can reach us by sending your feedback to the contacts on your screen and follow us on our digital media platforms. I'm Mahia Mutua. Thanks for watching. Global Business is up next.